President Trump apparently wants to roll back one of Obama's best accomplishments. He wants to reverse his Cuba policies. So this is from The Hill. The U.S.-Cuba Trade and Economic Council, a nonpartisan group, said the Trump administration is preparing to announce the changes to Obama-era policies in a June speech in Miami, according to the Daily Caller. The report cites two unnamed sources who said a bipartisan trio of senators, Marco Rubio, Bob Menendez, and Mario Diaz-Balart, pushed for the reversal. Obama, who became the first U.S. president to visit Cuba in almost a century last year, put in motion a series of policies to thaw relations with the communist island, which had been a strategic burden throughout the Cold War. So, for those of you who don't know the details of what went on with Cuba under the Obama administration, Obama basically made it so the U.S. treats Cuba like almost every other nation on earth treats Cuba, where you can now take flights to Cuba. Previously, there were no U.S. flights that went to Cuba. Now there are flights that go to Cuba and flights that come back here. You know, he softened basically rigid sanctions, strict sanctions on the flow of capital, eased business restrictions. It's not just, people frame it in the U.S. as like, oh, you know, it's beneficial for them, for the regime, the Castro regime in Cuba to have this policy. But what do we get out of it? A lot of people in the U.S. Take that position. But the reality is we've gotten quite a bit out of it. Like, for example, Cuba developed a lung cancer vaccine. And as a direct result of what Obama did, we now have an open line of communication, and we can mutually benefit from medicinal breakthroughs, for example. So there's a lot of what Obama did is just filed under the duh category. Now, Congress refused to lift the official embargo, but it's still the case that, you know, we've softened our relationship with them significantly. As they put in the article, we thawed our relationship with them. So, like I said, there's flights there, there's an open line of communication. There were deals made in terms of, you know, political prisoners. So, and it's not perfect, don't get me wrong. They still have some political prisoners, and obviously they're not doing everything that we'd like. But another giant accomplishment is Cuba legalized small business after Obama made this deal. Now, that's exactly what the Republicans have said that they wanted from Cuba all this time, is, oh my God, they're a communist nation, every decision is centralized, it's made from the top down, the government rules everything, we can't have that, that's crazy, you know, freedom and democracy, let's do it. And so Obama gets them to open up their markets a little bit. They legalize small businesses when previously they were not legal. And what happened? The Republicans are still against it. But again, they say, according to their own ideology, no, that's the reason why we got to be really standoffish with Cuba and not trade with them at all, not talk with them at all, and not have any flights and all that stuff, is because they don't act right. They don't have, like, you know, a free market. They don't have small businesses. Well, now he's made it so they did legalize small business, and the Republicans are still against it. So the deal with Cuba, it just was common sense. It's like taking our position from openly hostile to just neutral. And so what the fuck could be wrong with neutral? I mean, we like to give the Saudi government a blowjob every Tuesday, and they are an authoritarian, theocratic dictatorship. So whatever kind of human rights violations you could point to Cuba doing, and there are many, you can point to 10 times worse in Saudi Arabia, and that doesn't bother us. But they go, oh, well, you know, Cuba's communist, and that's different. Really? So an official Sharia state that has the same ideology, Wahhabi Islam, as ISIS does, somehow that's okay. We can be allies with that. But communism, oh my God, the worst thing ever. And by the way, there's a contradiction in the Republicans' ideology on this too, because you say, oh, what about China? Should we cut off trade with them tomorrow? They go, what do you mean, no? Well, China's officially communist. Now, you could say they don't function as a communist state, and that's true, they don't, but neither does Cuba. Neither one of them functions as a communist state, but they're both communist in name. So, but one we could trade with all day long, China, but Cuba, oh my God, communism. No, let me tell you what this is really about. This all goes back to the Cold War and to the fact that Cuba used to be a puppet island of ours. We had our own fascist dictator in there that was very welcoming of U.S. business interests, U.S. corporate interests, and he was overthrown in the revolution by Fidel Castro. So we're still butthurt because they got rid of our fascist puppet leader. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people on the left who make the mistake of then assuming, like, well, then Castro must be good. No, he wasn't. He acted like a dictator. And a lot of things he did were horrific. But that's neither here nor there. My point is, the reason why the U.S. has a standoffish policy and a fuck you policy with Cuba is a direct result of them overthrowing our fascist puppet who ran their country. And so we get all butthurt and give them the cold shoulder and say, then we're not going to do anything with you. And remember, there were repeated efforts to overthrow the Cuban government after they ousted our fascist puppet. So none of this has to do on our end with like freedom and democracy and we just want what's best for the people of Cuba, and you're a naive clown if you think that's the case. What Trump is doing here is illogical. It makes no sense. I mean, these senators who were against the Cuba deal, they're operating off an old school, mindset. Marco Rubio, his parents fled from Cuba, but guess what? They didn't flee from Castro, they fled from Batista, the U.S. fascist puppet. So it's hilarious that he's like, Castro's the worst, which is why my family had to flee from the previous dictator, who I support and we support. Wait, what? What? But these are people who the decision is not based on reason. The decision is based on, hey, let's just revert to the decades-long failure of a policy. By the way, if the sanctions were going to work, maybe decades in, they would have worked. Like, okay, let's have a full embargo. Let's do nothing with them. No flight in there. No open line of communication. No nothing. And what happened? They argued, well, that's going to weaken the regime, and the regime will fall. But the opposite happened. The exact opposite happened. You didn't weaken the regime. You strengthened the regime. You made them batten down the hatches. Everybody, fell in line behind their leaders. And they said whatever they got to do to keep the food coming in and to keep us safe and to keep us healthy and happy. So their policy just didn't work. It was incorrect. You strengthened the Castros. You didn't weaken them. You strengthened them. That's a fact. That's why decades into it, you're still fucking controlling the island. So they're wrong in that approach. But Trump, and this is how you know it's an extra level of stupid. Like, it's one thing if our cold relationship was cold all throughout Obama and Obama never did anything on Cuba to loosen it up, and then Trump goes in and I'm going to continue it. It's a whole nother level of stupid to say, oh, I know he reversed a lot of things and there was a mutual benefit for everybody, but now we're going to go in the other direction again. Like, that's just fucking knuckle-dragging, Neanderthal-like idiocy. That's what that is. Like, yeah, I know this is working and we have tangible results, and Cuba just legalized small business and now, they're opening up their markets a little more and people have a few more political freedoms, but I don't care. We're going to say like, oh, human rights violations now. Let's shut everything down. Well, again, you'll forgive me if I laugh at you if you take that position because you're so concerned about human rights abuses in Cuba, but Israel? Oh, do occupation and apartheid all day long. I don't give a shit. I don't care. Keep violating international law brazenly. Keep stealing more and more Palestinian land. We'll look the other way. We love it. Oh, Saudi Arabia, you don't let women drive? You behead people in the public square for witchcraft and sorcery? Whatevs. I don't care. We don't care. Who are you kidding? It's fine. That's human rights violations, schmumenschfleisch violations. I don't care. But Cuba, oh my God, you have some political prisoners? You locked up like journalists and you don't allow dissent? Oh my, well, I am so shocked and disturbed by this. You know, if people applied the same standards to the U.S. that the U.S. applied to Cuba, the U.S. would have nobody we even talk to around the world. Why? Well, I don't know. We violate international law all the time. We invaded a country that didn't attack us in Iraq and occupied it for over a decade. We waged an offensive war against a country that didn't attack us, killed minimum 200,000 civilians. We set up a worldwide torture regime. We set up the Patriot Act and we spy on everybody, collect everybody's metadata. So it's just hilarious that there's no logic to it. There's no objective standards. It's just like a bunch of man babies running the country. I'm going to go back to what we did for decades. It didn't work because Cuba's bad. And fucking Marco Rubio spoke to me for 5 minutes. And I said, oh, well, whatever you want, Marco. Tremendous. I'll do whatever policy you want, even if it's the dumbest one. Believe me. And fucking sell out idiot Democrats like Bob Menendez, who, by the way, is under an official corruption investigation. He's a Democrat, and he's, like, openly corrupt, and it's so bad he's under fucking investigation for it. But yeah, Trump's gonna listen to that jackass and go, oh, I'm sure this guy's got smart ideas about things. No, he doesn't. So, if Trump goes in this direction, which the preliminary leaks here say that he is, add it to the list of, what the fuck are you doing?